Okay, well, we had disorders. I'm going to be covering the dominantly inherited disorders. One of these disorders include how do you say it? Achondroplasia, and it's
Achondroplasia.
achondroplasia, and it's a form of dwarfism where heterozygous individuals have the dwarf phenotype, and this disorder occurs on the dominant allele, and usually dwarfism is present on the non-dominant allele. And so as you can see, one parent has it with the dominant allele and it passes it on to its offspring, and the offspring has a 50% of chance of inheriting it. And okay, so dominant inherited disorders, they're much less common than recessive disorders. They usually arise from mutations, and the reason why it's not so common is because usually the person that has a dominant disorder usually dies before birth or maturity. Only the late onset diseases result in the possibility of a lethal dominant allele being passed to the offspring. And Huntington's disease is one of these disorders. It's caused by a lethal dominant allele. Symptoms don't arise until about 35 to 40 years of age. And it's caused by the lethal deterioration of the nervous system. It's usually irreversible and fatal. A child born to a parent with this disease has a 50% chance of inheriting it. And geneticists have discovered that Huntington's disease occurs on the tip of chromosome number 4, and so this allows people to properly determine if their family has this disease.
I have recessive inherited disorders, kind of like what Emily said, how it's a lot more common, and thousands of disorders are from recessive traits. Recessive disorders can only appear though in homozygous individuals because you can't have a heterozygous, because then it would be dominant and the recessive gene wouldn't show through. And this is because the genes code for proteins, and there can be mutations to the proteins, like an extra protein may be added, or there may not even be any protein at all. Although people may be normal phenotype, meaning they don't have a disorder, they still may be a carrier. And the way to figure this out would be to use the pedigree that Clark showed us earlier, to like trace back to see what ancestors had the disorder, and then you may have gotten it and it just doesn't show through. But there's no like real way to, because the genetic disorders don't evenly divide into like all of the offspring, we don't know who's gonna get it and who's not. So it's just kind of a game of chance. And this is just kind of like saying how they're all different, and you can get like different distributions result from different genetic histories of the people's world. So like depending on where you are, it kind of depends on what kind of diseases and disorders you can get. So for example, cystic fibrosis is a really popular disease for Europeans, and 1 out of every 2,500 people have this disorder from European descent, and 1 out of every 25 of them is a carrier of this, even if they don't display the disorder. Children who inherit 2 recessive alleles for this have defective or absent chloride transport channels, and this mutated allele causes for high concentration of extracellular chloride, which causes the mucus that coats certain cells to become thicker and stickier, and it affects the pancreas, lungs, digestive tract, and other organs, and this causes poor absorption of nutrients, chronic bronchitis, foul stools, recurrent bacterial infections, and weakens natural antibiotics made by the body cells, so like it attacks you internally. And if it's left untreated, most children will die before their 5th birthday. There's like preventative treatments that you can do to it, but it's not totally curable. And you can like pound on the chest to clear the mucus, give daily doses of antibiotics. But in the U.S., more than half of the people that suffer are now able to survive to their late 20s, sometimes even 30s and beyond, like using these techniques. Another common recessive disorder is sickle cell disease, which is common among African descent, and it affects 1 out of every 400 African Americans. It is caused by the substitution of a single amino acid in the homeoglobin, yeah, protein of the red blood cells, causing the blood to be low within the body, and this causes physical weakness, pain, organ damage, and even paralysis. It causes like the cells to like clump together and clog the vessels so the blood can't pass throughout the body, and unfortunately there's no cure for the sickle cell disease. 2 sickle cell alleles must be present to have a full-blown case. You can't just have one, and one allele may still affect the phenotype. Even though the organism may be healthy, it may suffer from some of the symptoms, but it just reduces the blood and the oxygen. 1 out of every 10 Africans have the sickle cell trait and are most homozygous. Yeah. So,
Oh, okay. When you're saying that, are you saying that 1 in every 10 are heterozygous? Or are you saying that because you just said 1 every 400 carries it?
1 of every 400 carries it, and 1 of every 10 of those 400 are heterozygous.
All right, so, because the idea of having this sickle cell trait,
Right.
okay, the trait itself protects them from malaria, which is the reason why that that mutation has been kept, or within the population, is because people who have the sickle cell trait are immune to malaria.
But they have a lot of other things.
But they don't have the sickle cell disease, though,
Oh, right.
if they're heterozygous.
have
It's only if they're homozygous
alleles.
recessive that they have the sickle cell disease.
Yeah. So you may just have the trait if you have 1 allele, which causes you to be heterozygous, but if you have both alleles, then you have the sickle cell disease, not just the trait.
Okay, that makes sense.
And another one would be,
Sam had a question.
Why are they immune to malaria if they?
When the parasite tries to invade the red blood cells, it goes into a sickle shape due to the differently shaped hemoglobin proteins, and then those are cycled out by the spleen. Then the parasite has no way of really causing a full-blown infection. So anytime the parasite tries to get into red blood cells, it does that.
mating of close relatives is the next kind of disorder, and it is unlikely that 2 carriers of the same harmful allele will meet and mate, which is kind of why closely related family members like siblings and cousins and etc., they have an increased possibility of passing on the recessive trait greatly, and it's known as
Sanguinosis.
Yeah.
Or I know I have a hard time pronouncing that. That's something that you see a lot of in purebred animals, because some breeders will breed related specimens, especially when you're talking about dogs, for example. Purebred dogs, they get diseases like hip dysplasia. And in humans, we're talking hemophilia type A, which is in royalty because they weren't allowed to mix with other people. But with purebreds, this becomes a problem because they inbreed.
This could produce offspring that are homozygous for the recessive trait, and it is common, like domesticated animals and zoo animals, and this is why you can't marry or have relations with a close relative, because it makes it more likely to pass on the disease. The probability of a phenotype is best shown by using a Punnett square, which Kate kind of talked about earlier. And in the Punnett square, you have the one parent and their genotype, and then the other parent and their genotype set together. And all you do is you bring the A down in here, and then you bring this A here and bring it down, and then this one down here and here. And it just like shows you the possibilities of the different phenotypes your offspring will have. And so here, the capital A is the dominant allele for the yellow, and the lowercase a is the recessive allele for green. And here, the probability of having a yellow